What remains when the one who guided you is no longer there? A teacher, a master, a steady hand in the midst of chaos, and suddenly he tells you that he will go. The disciples feel it. Something is coming to an end. They ask, "Who will then be our leader?" It is a human question, an honest one. For if you have learned to follow a light, you fear the darkness that comes after. But the answer they receive is puzzling. Turn to James the just. For his sake, heaven and earth came into being. A name, a title, and a claim that surpasses everything. What does Jesus mean by this? Surely there was a James, brother of Jesus, leader of the early community, a righteous man, a martyr. But this sentence speaks of more, far more. For the answer does not point to a person, it points to a principle, to an order, a force, an inner justice that is more than morality. Justice not as law, but as balance. James is the image of something that wants to come alive in you when the outer teacher falls silent. In this video on Saying 12 of the Gospel of Thomas, we uncover its hidden meaning and explore what it truly means to find the just one within yourself. It begins with a feeling, a pull in the chest, a sense something is coming to an end. The disciples know that Jesus will soon leave them, and they feel restlessness rising within. Will they manage on their own? Will anyone remain to show them the way? What remains when the one who showed you the path is no longer by your side? The question they ask is not only theirs, it is ours. For every human being faces the moment when the familiar disappears. The teacher, the faith, the system, the support outside. Suddenly you stand there with empty hands, and you realize perhaps you relied on him more than on yourself. The philosopher Kierkegaard said, "Only when the teacher departs does the student begin to exist." And here lies the test. Not to follow any longer, but to stand upright yourself. Not to ask, "Who leads me?" but rather, "What carries me?" when no one else remains. Many flee from this emptiness. They immediately look for a new teacher, a new system, a new safety. Yet sometimes this is the first step toward maturity, to endure what stirs within you, when no one is left to decide for you. The French mystic Simone Weil wrote, "Loss is the first access to the real. For sometimes something must leave, so that you may feel that something within wants to rise, something of your own, still unshaped, but true. And it is there that transformation begins." Why do the disciples not ask, "How can we ourselves discern what is right?" Why do they immediately look for a new leader? Because it is easier to be led than to walk on your own. We all know this. As long as someone else sets the direction, we do not bear the full weight. If something goes wrong, it was the teacher, the system, life itself. But when no one walks ahead of you, then there are no excuses left. Then you become the source of your decisions. And that is frightening. The mystic Meister Eckhart taught, as long as a person clings to outer authorities, he is not truly free. A sentence that strikes. For real freedom means to take responsibility for your vision, your steps, your measure. Yet this is exactly what many fear, for it means you can no longer hide. Justice begins where you become honest with yourself, where you stop pointing outward and begin asking inward, what is my measure? What is true, even when it is uncomfortable? This is the fear that echoes in the disciples' question. Not only the fear of loss, but the fear that now they themselves are being called. Turn to James, the just. It sounds like a reference to a man, a name, a title, a role, but something about it does not fit. Why should James of all people be the new authority? And how could it be said of him that for his sake heaven and earth came into being? Perhaps it is not only one man that is meant, but a principle revealed through this name. In ancient spiritual texts, names are often ciphers. They point to something real, yet they speak in images. James was certainly a historical figure, brother of Jesus, leader of the Jerusalem community, ascetic, upright, a martyr. But here he becomes a symbol, a sign for something that reaches beyond the individual. For the epithet is decisive, the just. Not the wise, the strong, the holy, but the just. A word that runs deeper than it seems. The philosopher Plato called justice the harmony of the soul. Not merely outward obedience to law, but the inner balance between the forces within us. James, the just, stands for this balance, for an inner measure that separates truth from deception. Whoever turns to him does not turn to a man, but to order itself, to that which sets you right, when all else becomes uncertain. What a sentence. Vast, almost overwhelming. For his sake, heaven and earth came into being. It sounds like creation, like origin, like cosmic meaning. But how could this refer to a single human being? The answer lies in the title, the just. For justice is more than a moral demand. It is the measure by which life finds order. But what does that mean? Concretely, it begins within you. You sit there, listening, and suddenly you realize. You stay silent, even though something is not right. Or when you tell someone what they want to hear, not out of love, but out of fear of not belonging. Or when you override yourself again and again because you believe others are more important. Justice begins where you pause and honestly ask, what is the right thing to do? Not for my ego, but for the whole. Heraclitus, the philosopher of becoming, said, "From the clash of opposites, the most beautiful harmony arises." Justice is not unity at any cost, but the courage to let tension remain, until something genuine comes into balance. Pythagoras called measure the divine law. Measure is best, he said. In it rests the divine law. For everything that is meant to endure needs an inner measure. Relationships, thoughts, even yourself. Justice is then no principle from outside, but an inner compass. You feel it when you are sincere, when you do not bend yourself, and yet do not condemn. That is why it is said, "For his sake, heaven and earth came into being," because the just is not only a man, but the expression of an order that gives form to all life. And this very order can also come alive within you. When you begin to shape your life with truth, measure, and integrity, it may not create a new world at once, but perhaps a new human being. Jesus says, "Turn to the just," not to a new teacher, not to a system, but to something you yourself are meant to become. For the just lives within you, but only if you call him forth. What does that mean? That you must stop handing others the responsibility for your life. You sense him when you pause in a quarrel and ask yourself, am I seeking truth or merely being right? You sense him when, in the silence, you realize you have wronged someone, even if no one else has seen it, and when you make a decision that is not convenient, but true. Seneca said, "Whoever wishes to live justly must be his own judge." Yet this inner judge does not condemn. He sees. He reminds you of who you truly are. Justice within you does not mean being hard. It means being clear, not betraying yourself, but also not exalting yourself. It means not lying to be liked, not keeping silent where truth is needed. And sometimes it means holding yourself where once there was only judgment. The just within you is not an ideal. He is a direction, an inner voice that makes you stand upright, quiet yet steadfast. And the more you follow him, the more you yourself become the one to whom you can turn. For his sake, heaven and earth came into being. He does not mean only the world, but also you. For within every human being there are these two poles, the earthly and that which goes beyond. The just is the one who brings both together, not through knowledge, but through a lived measure, with feet firmly on the ground and the heart in the light. You sense it in small things. When in daily life you do not grow numb, but remain attentive. When you say no, even though silence would be easier. When you say yes, even though you are afraid to be seen. The German philosopher Nicholas of Cusa wrote, "Man is the connecting link between all things." Justice does not happen on the sidelines, but in the midst of life, between duty and freedom, between your shadow and what you may yet become. The just one does not live detached. He lives awake, in the dust and yet aligned. He does not ask, "What do I gain from this?" but rather, "What is true right now?" And when you live this, a new world arises, not somewhere out there, but within you. For sometimes the greatest order is not the one outside, but the one in your heart. And perhaps that is the truest guidance left to you when the teacher departs. Not someone who walks ahead of you, but something that carries you from within. The just within you.